Everybody mentions my beard. I grew a beard once before, about halfway through marriage, and Jeannie kept looking at me and I got the impression it was either her or the beard. I got rid of that. Now I thought I'd try it again. I do get emotional sometimes. Before I became a Christian, I think God really refined me hot, and then after I became a Christian, He refined me hotter. I feel sometimes that I've seared some of my emotions, and now that Jeannie's gone, He's tenderized me a lot, and so I feel like I might be becoming normal. When Joe mentioned about Downing, they asked Downing to come to a reunion when he was 95, thinking that he was about to pass, and they wanted to catch him. And I had those feelings that why Joe asked me to come. But Downing outlived about half of the people that showed up. So they were kind of surprised. Well, I too have really great gratitude that God introduced me to you guys. Y'all have been a joy that has really stayed with me. So I want to be able to say that too. One of the greatest joys of my life has been to be around you guys, healthy people all this time. I believe that we are involved in the greatest work that can be done on earth. I really believe that. I believe that if we can help healthy parents become godly, we will infect the kids and the grandkids if we go deep enough with these people. Same way with a pastor. If we can disciple a pastor and his wife, will impact an entire church. I really believe that that's what Jesus had in mind when He brought multiplication to the table. That we could make a great impact. And I want to read you Luke 1:16 and 17 and see if John the Baptist wasn't doing some of the similar things that we're doing. It says in it popped out. This is what Jesus said about John. Once it really did pop out. He said, He will turn many to the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. What a job description. What an accomplishment. It says He will be and then He'll also be a forerunner before Him, for Jesus, in the spirit and the power of Elijah, listen to this, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and the disobedient to the attitude of righteous. How would you like that to be on your epitaph, your tombstone? To have such a privilege to make that kind of impact. Well, I kind of tricked you because you'll be settling for something less than is out there if you choose that. Because Jesus said in Matthew 11:11 that John was one of the greatest people who had ever lived on earth. But He said the person who's least in the kingdom is greater than John. So there's something more out there than what John was doing. And who wouldn't want John's epitaph on their tombstone? So I think if we can figure out what this kingdom stuff is, we can be greater than John and have a better epitaph than that. Following John will help us make disciples. That's what John was doing. Following Jesus will help us make generations. I love John 7:16, where Jesus says, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me." And so Jesus was bringing something that John didn't know about. He was bringing this teaching, and I like what he said in John 5:19. He said, Jesus only does what he sees the Father doing in like manner. And so he has brought to the table things that is very attractive for us to be able to pursue and figure out. In Psalm 78:2, which Jesus repeats in Matthew 13:35, he says when Jesus came, he taught in parables things that have been hidden since the foundation of the world. So if we can figure out what this stuff is, and I think we already have our nose to the grindstone there, we can become impacting in the world. But I do think we need to be concerned about a few things. When we begin to read the Bible and we see Abraham's lineage, we begin to see that whenever there's a good man, then the area gets blessed. When we lose him, when we read Judges, when we lose him, things go to pot. And then when God raises up another good man, impact begins to take place. And we as we read through the entire Bible, we see this going on and on. And then when we get to the New Testament, when we read Jesus, even Jesus' ministry begins to fade over a period of time. But when he first raises up these 11, they go out and they turn the world upside down, because they're teaching exactly what Jesus told them to teach. But down the road, that begins to fade. Let me just, one of my go-to verses in this area that I like is in 2 John. Gosh, I'm losing my paper clips here. Not working for me. So in 1 John, he says this. I'm sorry, 2 John 9 and 10. He says, anyone who goes too far and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. I don't know if he meant, I almost want to caveat that. Maybe he's not walking with God, right? Or something like that. But he does not have God. The one who abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. So, and then he says in 10, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your home, or do not give him greeting. So I think these guys were fixated on what Christ taught. I think they were consumed with Christ taught. I think he was everything to them. The Old Testament was being fulfilled in what Christ taught. He was tweaking it, and he was making the Old Testament into its perfect form. And of course, the New Testament was the outflow of what his commands were. So if we can make sure that we that we begin to figure out what the essence of this is, and that we have to pass it on to our key Isaac. If we don't pass this on to our Isaac, this thing is going to begin to lose its fade, begin to fade. Because although the disciples turned the world upside down, 57 years later, in 90 AD, when Jesus speaks in Revelation 2 and 3, he says it's not working. And he says, if you don't change, I'm going to take your candlestick from you on each of them. And then when Paul comes along, he preaches to the Corinthians in AD 50. And he was there a year and a half, and you better believe he preached Christ. 1.5 years later, 53 AD, he writes back to the Corinthians, and they're already off course. And they're splintered. Chelo got word to him that there were some were following Paul, some Apollos, some Peter, and some Jesus. This thing is easy to lose, and the only way I know that we can stop from losing it is to make sure that our key men and women understand this as good or better than we do. And so we're going to have to go really deep to be able to communicate this to our Isaac, because we will lose it if we don't. there's an illustration that some of y'all may have seen, but I'm sure some of y'all have not. But this is one of the best illustrations I've come up with. That when I go to a post, I talk about their general, and so how many stars their general has. But there, and I say that the general's going to call all of his staff and extended staff into his office, and he wanted to give them a message to send to the troops. And so and then he sends them out. And so boy, this general comes in and says, the general told us to draw weapons, we're going to war. And another general comes in and says, that is not true. I was in the room with the general. He said, block leave. And now you've got birds and brigadiers, and you've got majors, and they're all lined up down here. I just described the church. The only way we can figure this thing out is to go up and talk to the general. There's no other way. And that's what Matthew 26, I just lost it, when Jesus, this curtain was split. Lost it. But in Matthew there, when the curtain is split, from the top, from the bottom, God is compelling us. This is where we want to get our answers, not down here. And so if we're not, and now the problem with this is in Colossians 2:3, Paul says, in Christ is hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. If it is hidden, then it's not going to be on top of the Gospels. It's going to be buried within the Gospels. And so we have got to make sure that the Gospels, that we've got to assume we don't understand the depth of the Gospels. And so we need to be in the Gospels every day. Maybe not a whole chapter, half chapter, third of a chapter, but we need to be in the Gospels every day in order to figure this thing out. I've lost my...
it was Matthew 27:51, available.
27:51? And I think the way we're going to be able to do this is not by taking people from non-Christians and bringing them all the way up to a 10, where Jesus finished training his disciples. We're going to have to pick them up before that. We're not going to have the time or the ability to stay with them that long. So the word that I picked is healthy orphans. What Jesus did was picked up men who others had laid the foundation, and then he finished the course. So while we need to be involved with evangelism and discipleship, we need to be looking for one person who seems to stand out and want to go further. And we need to make sure that one person understands Christ the way we do, if not better. And that way, the third generation has a chance. And we're not responsible for 10 generations. We're only responsible for 2. Us and our Isaac. Jesus did it with the 11. Abraham did it with Isaac. All we need is 1. If God gives us 11, that means that he's going to create a little revival. But outside of that, the promise of Abraham is 1 good man. So we need to be fishing for that 1 good man. Just the way God does. 2 Chronicles 16:9 says that God...
the eyes of the Lord.
Unto through all the
Yeah,
earth, seeking for those whose hearts are blameless, that he might give them strength.
yeah, you probably, y'all hear that? That he's fishing for people, and when he finds them, he earmarks them. Jesus picked that same mentality up. He began to fish for people, and they were hungry and ready to sell their careers at his bidding. And then he commissions them to do exactly the same thing that he did. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to be involved in the basics, but we need to be fishing for one person who stands out. And then begin to build around that one person. The problem is these kind of people are scarce as hen's teeth. They're hard to come by. And it could be that 99% of your time will be doing what John the Baptist did. And that is an honorable calling. But you need to be looking for one Timothy in your life. And you've got to get that Timothy deep in the Gospels. There's a fellow that didn't come out of Campbell. He came out of Knox, but he is equally as excited about Jesus as we are. He's on that staff. And I went and spoke at a rally for him a while back. And I went and got time with his key man. And his key man was not even in the Gospels. You can be sure that it's going to die in the third generation. Because we need to be so fixated that we get criticized over this. And of course, there's a lot of other information. There's got to be enough cooking time with these people so that they become as consumed as we are. Let me read you some mandates that I got that I think that will overstate the issue, but and it might get a little too repetitive. But let me read them. In John 8:31, it says, "If you hold to my teaching, you're truly my disciples." And in John 12:26, "My Father will honor the one who serves me." In John 13:15, "I've set you an example that you should do as I have done to you." John 14:12, "Anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing." John 14:15, "If you love me, obey what I command." John 14:21, "Whoever has my command and obeys them, he loves me." Catch the repetition? 14:23, "If anyone loves me, he will obey my teaching." And I've got about 7 more. So I think these disciples understood that. I'm not sure we do. I'm not sure the church really comprehends this. And so again, it's not our job to change people's lives. It's our job to fish for people who wants their lives changed. And then we lock in with those people. I need a podium here. I give you one more verse that really speaks to me. Then I want to give you my life verse. In Luke 8:18 in the NLT, I love it. It says, "Pay attention to how you hear. To those who listen to my teaching, more understanding will be given. But to those who are not listening, even what they think they understand will be taken away from them." So that's a threat, or a promise, however you want to look at it. And so we want to make sure that we are struggling to understand that teaching that he gives. And again, I mentioned it as a healthy orphan, that we're looking for people that Jesus told the 12 in John 4:38. "Others have done the heavy lifting. I've sent you to minister where others have done the hard work, and you've entered into their labors." Every person that I've helped, someone else has done the hard work. Chuck showed up and he has already been infected. It was the easiest pie to help him. I found out that it's easy to help someone who wants to be helped. Andrew's testimony, same thing. It's been every one of them. God makes sure that we can't become proud over this thing, because he's the one that's dropping these people. And I think he'll do it if we understand how to fish. I began to, when I first got training with the navigators and finished college, and Gene and I went to Fort Knox to get training, I went right into the SDS the first week because I'd already had exposure, and they thought I was ready. Mel Leader was an AV rep at the time, and he asked if people would go around and share their life verse. And I remember swallowing, and I had no clue what they was talking about. And so they were gracious, and they passed me up, and went on around. So my objective was to find a life verse. And that was, I wanted to have a verse that comprised what I thought God was trying to do in my life. I came up with several, and I think I forgot them or lost them. But one of the early ones that stuck with me, that I really bought into, was Matthew 6:33. That if I would seek what God values, He would take care of my back. What a promise! And that was my life verse for a long time. And then I found this other one that I mentioned to you earlier that I felt fit in with this one, and that was Colossians 2:3. That if I'm going to understand this kingdom that I'm supposed to be involved with, I've got to get it from Him. And so I used Colossians 2:3 for a while. Some of y'all have remember when I had my Ezekiel 9, 1 through 6. Most of you don't, but some of you do. That I love Ezekiel 9:4. And God was giving Ezekiel a vision, and he had 7 men come in front of him, and one had a writing kit, and the other 6 had swords. And he sent the man with the writing kit out to Jerusalem, where God's focus was with His people. And he said that whoever cares about what's happening to God's people, he said, put a mark on their forehead. And then whoever doesn't care, leave them alone. And then when he returns, then he sends the 6 out and he says, now go kill everyone who doesn't have that mark. Because they don't care about what's happening to the kingdom of God. Good, and but now I've come to my last verse. That is my life verse now is I may keep this one, and it comes before God ever creates man, and He's thinking to Himself or speaking whatever in Genesis 1:26, and He says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." That was His plan. So today's plan should be the same as His original plan was. That we need to be looking for people who want to become like Jesus. That pretty? That's not 45 minutes, but I think that's probably enough.
Cecil, let's just take some time for question and answer and comment. Can we do that?
Sure.
15 minutes. So maybe a question or maybe something that resonated in your heart with what Cecil said, and you want to sort of piggyback on that.
Cecil, I got a question. A lot of my experience, as I mentioned earlier, been at places where not a lot of full-time staff, right? So we're kind of out on our own. One of the things I realize is that it's really hard to do what Jesus did with that community. Either for me, but even more so for the people I'm helping, right? So something that I feel like God has shared with me, and I want you to see if this jives with the context of what you shared, is if I'm helping a guy and I really want him to catch the vision of what Jesus did, it's not going to work very well if it's just me and him forever, right? I got to get him to turn around and help other people. And so when I'm doing that, a lot of times I'm fishing for men, and I know a lot of these guys aren't really going to pan out. But in my view, those people who may be really babies are helpful for this guy, because he's got to get training on them, because if it's just me and him, he can't train me, right? And so does that kind of jive with some of what you experienced, right? You said there's 99% of the people we see, they're not going to be generational,
yeah,
right? And it doesn't mean God doesn't love them, obviously, but
they're still going to heaven.
They're also key for the training of our men or women?
I verbalize it this way, that these men are going to come out of the community. They're going to come out of the Bible studies, or someone else's Bible studies that we get to meet. So you can't find the good men without doing the basics with them, and get them into evangelism, get them into to the Word, and then you're looking for someone who's looking for more. So I don't know how to do it without a Bible study. I know when I got to Campbell and I showed up by myself, I went knocking on BOQ doors and said, "We got a Bible study. We're trying to look for people." We didn't have one, but I was looking for one. But like I said, for the first 5 years, things were anemic at Fort Campbell. So I think you can't separate Jesus fishing for these kind of men with his preaching to the masses and his commanding to do evangelism down the road. So the Great Commission. Let me mention one other thing. Before Jesus dies, he tells his disciples that they're going to kill me, and I'll meet you in Galilee. Well, one of those times, Peter says, not on my watch, and he misses the whole point. Galilee was the point. And so, and he says it a couple other times. So when he dies, and Mary makes her way to the tomb, and he's not there. And there's a person sitting on one or two, depending on what depiction, and was sitting on the tomb. And he said, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" And he said, "He'll meet you in Galilee, just like he told you." NLP says, "There, I told you." It was really important that they understand. Yeah. So then they go back and tell the 11, and they don't believe her. And so, but Peter and John make their way back, and I forgot. She went out and met the gardener. Let me insert this, and he says, "Mary," and she melts, and he says, "Don't cling to me. Go tell Peter and the 11, or Peter and the disciples. I'll meet them in Galilee." And then when they come, they're totally confused. So and then Jesus shows up amongst them. "I'll meet you in Galilee." So once they go to Galilee, John 21 says that if everything had been recorded that Jesus taught, it would fill the whole world. So all this has been splintered down into one book. Some think Mark did the first book, and the others built around it. So what more could he tell them? I mean, so he tells them 3 verses, Matthew 28, 18, 19, 20. And to me, these 3 verses are the jugulars. I want you to go into the nations, which is the Gentiles at this point. I want you to make disciples, and it's going to be the Old Testament that Jesus has tweaked with his influence, and then do evangelism. So I think by doing these 3 things, this is where we fish from. I would fish over here, and God would drop me someone from over here. So you need that community.
Almost like you're saying, Cecil, is that there needs to be a Galilee in our life, a place that we are doing the laboring. We're doing the evangelism and the discipleship, and we're looking for and asking God for the key people to come with us into that harvest.
He took the 11. He did the ministry in the presence of the 11. Yeah, so that's so you. It's really not. We did a talk on the 3 E's one time at Campbell, evangelism, establish, equipping. I took equipping, and I realized that equipping is only taking someone with you to do evangelism and discipleship. And I had to think real quick how I was going to handle that. But it's taking someone with you.
Yeah.
But it's spending the amount of time with them that it takes. I just moved in my two of my grandchildren into my home a week ago. And that's what I'm going to be trying to build. I'm trying to get enough time that they understand this thing by us meeting daily.
You mentioned when you met with a key person that he wasn't even in the Gospels.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that you want to look for someone who has an interest in the growth of others. Is there anything else that you look for in a key guy?
I look for three things. Someone who's willing to deal with sin in his life. So he's got to be approachable. So I can ask him questions. I want to know about it, whether he's stuck in porn. I want to know whether he's reading the Bible daily. Well, that's number two, but I stay with number one. How he's dealing with sin in his life. And then I look for someone who's willing to be disciplined. Jesus never called his disciples Christians. He called them disciplined learners. So if I can't get people in the Word, I can never win the war. So with my grandkids, it's going to be in the Word every day. That's the condition to live with me. And thirdly, and I've just begun to talk with them about this, is to be to look for someone younger to help grow. They're ones and twos, so it's going to be kind of hard for them. But we're talking about that. But I look for those three things. And if they'll do those three things, well, I'll be thrilled to meet with them.
Cecil, I was just struck as we listened around the room about how much prayer went into, God, would you bring someone into my life that I can invest in? Some Carol's and Andrew's and my story. And I also remember a workshop that you gave where you gave this illustration where if you piled up all the prayers in that room, that the room would be filled with God, give me one more.
Yeah.
And maybe the rest of the prayers would fit on like the chair.
It is true.
It just strikes me that that the genius in the Paul-Timothy relationship really is the Timothy. It really is that 16:9 person, and that the core activity we can have as God's people is, God, would you just help me to meet those people? Could we be a part of continuing to activate them for the kingdom work? And just for me, that I think that's probably the number one thing that I've taken away from you, that God, would you just help me to meet the people you're already working, and to be faithful to help them continue to grow.
And then be prepared that God may only give you one, that it makes it to the end. And that's and the rest of the time will be in evangelism and discipleship. And that needs to be okay with us. I'm still shivering from the cold. Chilly.
I got one for you, Cecil. If I listened well, and I'm going to miss this, I think you were sharing that what was crucial here was helping people connect with Jesus. Colossians 2:3, in Him is all the wisdom, and knowledge, and so kind of sometimes people aren't going that direction, so they're not going to have answers, but Jesus has the answers. Seek Him. So as we are making disciples, how do we ensure that we're not making disciples of ourselves? How do we help people make sure they're come to know Jesus more?
Well, I think it starts there. Paul said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." So it starts there. I think it starts with people following us. We are their Christ. But if we don't eventually hook them on to Christ, then that will be the breaking point. Jesus said in Matthew 23:8, you only have one rabbi. And there were rabbis throughout Israel, but you only have one rabbi. And that's me. And then in 23:10, he says you only have one teacher, and that's the Christ. So although we start off with being their example, if we don't hook them into Christ, then they'll be doing what John the Baptist did, and they won't be able to make this multiplication jump.
John 8, right, with the woman at the well. We believe in you not because of what you have said, but because of what Jesus has said. That transition in one verse.
That's a transition. I think that verse that those who serve me, the Father will honor. I think that's enough for me right there. That the reason God wants Jesus to be observed is because Jesus is God. To not give Jesus the credentials that the Father has is robbery. So that, once we can figure this out, that life needs to be revolved around understanding Him, and then following. And I'll meet people and they'll say, you can ask a pastor or anybody, are you following Christ? And they will go, yeah. And then, but if you quiz them, it may be 10% of what Christ did. So it's going to be a hard sell for us. I mean, I can remember arguing with a NAB guy. He was going to a nursing home, spending a lot of time. I'm going to go, there's nothing wrong with that, and if God calls you to do it, do it. But that's not what Jesus did. So, again, I don't want to go against anybody's revelation, but I do want to follow instructions.
If that man brought a man with him to the nursing home,
Yeah.
would it been change?
That's an insightful question.
It's just practice.
As long as he keeps getting time with that guy and maybe talking about, Jesus did focus on young people. And my mentor, I'm going to be joining him in Naples, Florida, and he wants me to speak to his guys. And he said they'll be between the ages of 30 and 60.
This is weird.
Jim Webster told me that when my mentor turned me over to him and went to make disciples in the church, Jim Webster said he never made another reproducer. And Jim met with him until Jim's death. So this thing is, I think we may need to be very careful on following his example. It is not that we can't go to the nursing home, but that can't be where our expectations are. Our expectations are Jesus met with the late teens. And today this may be the 20s compared to what their maturity versus our maturity. But that'd be fine. But we've got to get them where that before the guys can't get out of addiction on porn. We've got to get them where that they haven't been programmed by their pastors and their churches. One of the best things that happened to me is I wasn't discipled by the Navigators. One of the best things that happened to me, because well, let's see, two things. I'm going to say another thing. One of the best things that happened to me is I wasn't raised up in a church. And so when I prayed to receive Christ, I assumed that I was supposed to obey. It was clear. And yet I'm afraid that some of our people raised up in churches, grace has dumbed down the call for obedience. And then I appreciate I'm raised up by the Navigators because I was ready to hit the road when the Navigators met me. Otherwise, they may have tried to get me on the road too soon. If you know what I mean by that. And I think we may just need some cooking time. Jesus didn't start till he was 30. I think there was a reason for that. And he took all that time meeting with his disciples before he commissions them. Disciples that we don't know that disciples had any key people themselves until he commissioned them, because they're not listed, and by not listing, I think that we need to draw from that. If they're not being listed, then the emphasis is on their development, not on their reproduction. Gosh, you guys got to be full.
So could I just ask you to, when you speak of the promise of Abraham, how do you weave together the promise of Abraham into this focus on Jesus right now?
For you, that's probably a rhetorical question, but I'll answer it. I think Abraham was the beginning of the church. Let me back up just a little bit. When God makes Adam and warns him not to eat of this particular fruit, the fruit of they're getting the answers, but they got to look to him for the answers. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they do. Then from then on, his children go awry, and so and he drowns them all. Once Noah has his children, guess what's going to happen down the road sooner or later? We see that going on. Well, he's going to have to drown them again and again, unless he makes a change in history. And this is where Abraham comes in. The change in history is Abraham is going to have a kid that God is going to sire. And he's going to, you know how many sperm goes into a woman during intercourse? I Googled it once and it said over 300 million. I'm not sure I believe that, but I know I've heard others were a couple million, but it's staggering. So God can be able to pick the sperm and connect it to that egg and come up with whomever he wants. And so he is going to give Abraham a kid that he approves of. And that's what I call miracle kids. The biology belongs to us, the miracle kids belong to him. And so this miracle kid he's never going to lack for Isaac's, for Isaac's, or for Noah's. And so he's going to bring him out so that he can always call on these kind of people whenever he thinks that they deserve it. And so so this promise, and then he's loyal to the promise. So now he keeps Israel to the point that he can't stand him anymore. In fact, I just read that he hated him. It's hard to believe that, but he hated him, and so he destroys them, almost all of them. And then so now the promise of Abraham shifts to Jesus, and it starts again. So the promise of Abraham, he was an insider, God gave him one. Jesus was an outsider, he gave him 11. And so if that's, I don't know if that's clear enough, you could probably fill in whatever I'm missing.
Well, when you say an insider, you mean as compared to an outsider, are you talking about?
Yeah, he's got a job.
Yeah, job, right. Just wanted to make- okay.
Versus not a job, so he expects more out of the guy who's full-time, of course. But but if he just gives you one.
That's all you need.
So the promise of Abraham is that he's going to make sure that the world does not want for representation. And that's what he's fishing for. And that's what we need to know how to fish for. But in order to know how to fish for him, we have to know how to cut bait. And that's going to be on his teachings. Let me give you one verse that I love. John 15 is my, John is my favorite book in the Bible. John 15 is my favorite chapter. After spending 6 years at Fort Knox, and I did the last rally, I spoke on John 15. And I've loved John, and I've gone through the Bible so many times. I'll go through the Gospels 4.5 times for every year. But 6 months ago I saw a verse in John 15 that I'd never seen before. or that spoke to you before. And it was John 15:3. John 15:1 says the Father is the vine dresser, or he takes care of it. 2, verse 2, he prunes every branch so that it can bear more fruit. Verse 3, he says, you guys have already been pruned by the teachings that I've given you. So fruitfulness will come out of those teachings. In person.
Can I ask, I have a question that it's not quite fully formed in my mind, but, so you know, the promise is that we will get an Isaac, possibly more. My generation and lower, we like to do very little effort, give forth very little effort for a very quick return. And that's just not really how God operates. So what would be your counsel for how do we beat our arrows more than 3 times in pursuing this and pursuing God, but yet being happy with just one Isaac?
Yeah, that is one of the most difficult things to make people content with, is to be content with one Isaac and spend the rest of your time with making disciples. The only thing I know to do is it's got to be within the heart of the person. Examine your own hearts. I know your story. That and my story is when Randy Acton asked me to go to Bible study, I said yes. When he asked me to move into his basement, I said yes. When he asked me to come back for training, I said yes. So unless you find someone who wants to do that, I have no idea how to do anything differently. So back to what he said, that you need to pray for this. Now the problem is, and I almost want to tell you, I tell you a story every once in a while. You and Pat heard them and to people because it typifies. But I was just going to say something about my mind's slipping sometimes. I wanted to say something about that.
Well, about you're talking about
Snyder
prayer and being content with what God gives you, and
Yeah, it's gone.
well, her story about her, you're talking about her and Patrice and Matt Purdom, how they were together, they were praying, and God basically miraculously connected Matt Purdom with Larry Knopp, and
You're telling this story. I mean,
Yeah.
she was, for whatever reason, she was ready. She was hungry, and nobody beat her, or she wanted more. And you heard the testimonies. These people want more than what they have. I can't tell you how to find those. I can only tell you they're out there. And here's what I was going to say. Usually about a 30-cent block, but if I don't pay it quickly, it'll be gone. It's gone. See.
Believe me, I know exactly what I
Yeah, you do.
It'll be here in about 30 more seconds.
you said, so I can't tell you how to find them, but they're out there.
Yeah.
And in prayer, you're asking God for them.
Yeah. You do what He tells you, but you're fishing. You know, well, that's an important verse. That when Jesus says, "Follow me," He doesn't say, "And I'll show you how to have a relationship with God," or "Follow me, and I'll show you how I can do some miracles." It's always, "I'll show you how to fish for people." And it wasn't just people. It was the 11. This type of person, and that's what we need to make sure that we include that in whatever ministry we're involved with. I think I finished.